If you open up X, formerly Twitter, you will see people hating the Jews in about 3 swipes. People are mad about Israel. On the left, they're mad because they're super sweet on the Hamas terrorist organization for some reason. I don't understand it, but for some reason, a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people on the left, really excited about Hamas. And then a lot of people on the right are really upset about Jews as well because they seem to be running everything. And so what I see is left and right side of the aisle, a bunch of people mad about Judaism. And when you think about it, this is a little bit crazy because I'm like, all right, it's an ancient place. Yeah, it's probably one of the oldest ancient civilizations that's still somewhat intact. Egypt no longer has their pharaohs of old, but the theocracy of Judaism still really is, it may be the only ancient society that still exists in some form like it used to. But what is it about that? I looked it up this morning. Israel is about a sixth the size of the state we're in right now, Georgia. Georgia. We're not the center of the world here. We're 6 times bigger than Israel. We got a lot more people too. What is it about this place across the ocean, a very, very small place that makes it such a lightning rod for controversy over the millennium? Because if you're any bit of a student of history, you recognize there has been anti-Semitism, people hating Jews for as long as we've been having recorded history. Isn't that incredible to you? Even now, surrounded by enemies. And if you go back to any of the ancient empires, I mean, like even within the Bible, whether it's Egypt or Assyria or Babylon, there was this anger and upset and desire to wipe Israel off the map. And still today, a lot of the signs by angry mobs are saying from the river to the sea, eradicate Israel. Have you thought about why in the world Israel is such a big upset? Why are people so angry at the Jews? I see the early disciples and Jesus himself had every reason to reject the Jews, and yet still didn't. And if you go back in the Old Testament as well, you see all kinds of upset with the Jews. If one noteworthy one is in Ezekiel 16, it's talking about Israel became so evil and corrupt that they made Sodom and Gomorrah look righteous by comparison. That's how bad. And still, God had this special love for Israel. What is that? I think it's such a poignant subject in our news right now that we might as well mention it anyway. I did a word study search of Israel is mentioned in the Bible over 2,400 times. And Jew is mentioned in this ESV Bible about 260 times. And so if you want to talk about Israel or Judaism, I'm like, we're in the right source. But I want to lean in so that we can be able to understand our times and say, what is the big deal about Israel? I'm like, first off, you got to understand that it all started with a promise made to a man about 4,000 years ago. You could argue that there was a start even before that, but let's center in on Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation. God loved Abraham, and it says, Abraham, you're awesome, you rock. I love you with an everlasting kind of love, and I'm going to bless the entire earth through your offspring. And so that was a promise God made. God loved Abraham and decided to bless him, and from him, the nation of Israel springs. So this is old stuff. 4,000 plus years ago, God made a promise, and God keeps his promises. And he says, Abraham, this is your land, and it will belong to your offspring forever. Now, fun thing, really fun thing. Around 2,000 years later, Jesus, an offspring of Abraham. Galatians give us commentary on this and says, no, Jesus is the offspring that comes from Abraham in which the whole world will be blessed by. And so the plan was to bless Abraham through his offspring, and that offspring is Christ. And the land that your offspring will inherit forever is Israel, specifically Jerusalem. And so what you'll understand, the story behind the story is Jerusalem belongs to Jesus. And one day, Jesus is coming back. And do you know where he's coming first when he arrives? Jerusalem. It's his city. And so that was where it started. And so it goes way, way back to the beginning. With Jesus, he is the promised offspring of Abraham. He's also going to reign eternally as king as promised to David, and he's a prophet as prophesied through Moses. And so all the patriarchs actually point to Jesus Christ, the man who split time in two, the most famous man that has ever walked the face of the earth. Can you see the fingerprints of God at work throughout human history? The most center figure of all the world, Jesus Christ. I mention this all the time because I think it's so important. Of like, the year is 2024, and we only have one explanation of why. Every country in the world recognizes, yeah, it's 2024. And it's because Jesus was born 2024 years ago, give or take, right? So that's the central point of history. You see God's fingerprints there. And you also notice, because Israel is such a big deal on the world stage and always has been, you read history textbooks, and I'm like, man, a lot of people trying to kill Jews and hate Jews. What is it about that? Well, you got to recognize you can't possibly understand the place of Judaism, Israel, Jerusalem. You can't understand any of it without understanding that the war is actually spiritual. Satan recognized God chose a people, not because they were deserving, not because they were so much better than anyone else, not because they were more righteous. And in fact, the Old Testament mentions many times, no, it's not because Israel was righteous. They're actually more stubborn than anyone. And in that respect, you've like they were less deserving. God even admitted that countries he had destroyed because of their unrighteousness, Israel became worse than them. And so it wasn't because they deserved anything. It's because God decided to make a promise to a man he loved and his offspring that would set everything right. Do you understand? But the battle is spiritual. Satan sees this, and he sees God's chosen people and the vehicle that he brought salvation to the world, and he hates it. And so what he would like to do is, one, eradicate Judaism from the planet. That's Satan's plan as well. And he's been trying to do that for thousands of years, trying to destroy the Jewish people and Israel as a nation. And, you think of, I was reading a church history book because I'm a nerd like that. I love church history. It was a church historian by the name of Philip Schaff. And in the preface to volume 1, he mentions the Jews. And then he says this line, and he says, could there be a better argument for the existence of God? I'm like, what does that have to do with the other? I'm like, actually, it's a wonderful apologetic. Look at Israel. It's a drop in the bucket when it comes to population of the world and geography. You'd agree. And it's kind of in the center of the world, right there. It is the bridge between 3 continents. Africa, Asia, Europe. It's right there in the center. And guess what it's surrounded by? Everyone that's hated them for thousands of years. How is this country not completely gone? Even when you take away their national identity, so Israel as a nation doesn't exist, still, somehow the Jewish people remain. They don't have a homeland, and in the 1940s, they got it back. But regardless, how does a country keep its national identity amidst all this persecution and people who are tyrants of old, trying to eradicate Judaism? The fact that Israel is somehow against the whole world that is surrounding them, that hates them, and there's a dot in the Middle East. Here's a bunch of the Islamic world that wants Israel gone, and still Israel is still standing thousands of years later. How? Impossible. There's nothing quite like it. How is this possible? Except that God has promises for Israel. Just like Jesus, who was murdered by the Jews, said, no, I desire to gather you to myself. And then what he ends up going into, he says, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He has plans for Israel. He has plans for the Jewish nation. And so I wanted to be able to give you some type of commentary so that you can figure out what in the world do you do with Judaism. I became really alarmed recently because I woke up to some of what some people on the right side of the aisle, you got left and right side of the political aisle, a lot of people on the right side really don't like Israel because they understand this graphic. Can you throw this up? Look at all these organizations on the left. This is incredible. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, between the 3 of those companies, they're basically controlling most of the wealth of America. A major portion. They really kind of own everything. I read recently where 60% of the homes in Georgia are owned by one of these companies. Is that true? Anyway, so met all these social media companies, Google, YouTube. And then if you look at the right, You see Star of David, that's a Jewish symbol, and it's like all these companies are run by Jewish persons or persons that were grown up in a Jewish home. And I'm like, are they running the world? What in the world is happening? You can go back to our slide. I'm like, and I don't know what to make of that, but I understand some people are really upset at the Jewish nation. And I'm like, well, these are individuals. I wonder if Satan desires to take Israeli people, and if he can't eradicate them from the face of the earth, what he'd like to do is corrupt them. He'd like to be able to make them kings of the earth, corruptible and ruling everything. Like it's one of the two, kill them or corrupt them at the top places. And I'm like, I don't know, but I know this about the nation of Israel. God chose them. God has promises for them, and they sit under God's supernatural protection. So beware of like, I'll be an ally of Israel, because I think to actually not be an ally of Israel is to be against God. So I'm like, oh, starts there. And I'm like, but they may hate you, John. I'm like, yeah, well, then I'd just be in good company. They seem to really hate Jesus. They seem to really hate Paul. I don't require a Jewish people to love me back, but I'm going to keep loving and keep preaching and recognize that God has something special planned for Jerusalem, for Israel. You understand? I risk a lot in talking about this, but I want to be able to take a biblical perspective to all the political noise. With 2,400 mentions, and we got the playbook here and the ancient history, I think it is absolutely appropriate to talk about this inside church. Very good. If you don't think so, I believe we're probably a little bit politically jaded and propagandized, so much so that we think that really actual biblical topics are off limits because politics called them recently. I'm like, nope, not doing that.